Hi, I'm Joel Larson, and I'll be reading Red Harvest by Dashiell Hammett, released in 1929. Red Harvest is considered the origination of the trope of setting two antagonists against one another to achieve the final goal. Dashiell Hammett was born in St. Mary's County, Maryland in 1894. He grew up in Philadelphia and Baltimore. He left school at the age of 14 and held several kinds of jobs thereafter: messenger boy, newsboy, clerk, timekeeper, yardman, machine operator, and stevedore. He finally became an operative for the Pinkerton's detective agency. World War I, in which he served as a sergeant, interrupted his sleuthing and injured his health. When he was finally discharged from the last of several hospitals, he resumed detective work. Subsequently, he turned to writing, and in the late 1920s, he became the unquestioned master of detective story fiction in America. During World War II, Mr. Hammett again served as sergeant in the Army, this time for more than 2 years, most of which he spent in the Aleutians. He died in 1961. The following is an excerpt from Red Harvest, pages 120 through 126. The chief looked at the wall clock again, and at his watch. It was exactly 2 o'clock. He turned to the phone. It rang. He grabbed it and said, "Noonan talking." "Yes. Yes. Yes. Right." He pushed the phone aside and played a tune on the row of pearl buttons on his desk. The office filled up with coppers. "Cedar Hill Inn," he said. "You follow me out with your detail, Bates. Terry, shoot out Broadway and hit the dump from behind. Pick up the boys on traffic duty as you go along. It's likely we'll need everybody we can get. Duffy, take yours out Union Street and around by the old mine road. McGraw, we'll hold headquarters down. Get out of everybody you can and send them after us. Jump." He grabbed his hat and went after them, calling over his thick shoulder to me, "Come on, man, this is the kill." I followed him down to the department garage where the engines of half a dozen cars were roaring. The chief sat beside his driver. I sat in back with 4 detectives. Men scrambled into other cars, machine guns were unwrapped, armloads of rifles and riot guns were distributed, and packages of ammunition. The chief's car got away first, off with a jump that hammered our teeth together. We missed the garage door by half an inch, chased a couple of pedestrians diagonally across the sidewalk, bounced off the curb into the roadway, missed a truck as narrowly as we missed the open door, and dashed out King Street with our siren wide open. Panicky automobiles darted right and left, regardless of traffic rules, and let us through. It was a lot of fun. I looked back, saw another police car following us, a third turning into Broadway. Noonan chewed a cold cigar and told the driver, "Give her a bit more, Pat." Pat twisted us around a frightened woman's coupe, put us through a slot between a streetcar and a laundry wagon, a narrow slot that we couldn't have slipped through if our car hadn't been so smoothly enameled, and said, "All right, but the brakes ain't no good." "That's nice," the gray-mustached sleuth on my left side said. He didn't sound sincere. Out of the center of the city, there wasn't much traffic to bother us, but the paving was rougher. It was a nice half-hour's ride, with everybody getting a chance to sit in everybody else's lap. The last 10 minutes of it was over an uneven road that had hills enough to keep us from forgetting what Pat had said about the brakes. We wound up at a gate topped by a shabby electric sign that had said Cedar Hill Inn before it lost its globes. The roadhouse, 20 feet behind the gate, was a squat wooden building, painted a moldy green, and chiefly surrounded by rubbish. Front door and windows were closed. Blank. We followed Noonan out of the car. The machine that had been trailing us came into sight around a bend in the road, slid to rest beside ours, and unloaded its cargo of men and weapons. Noonan ordered this and that. A trio of coppers went around each side of the building. 3 others, including a machine gunner, remained by the gate. The rest of us walked through the tin cans, bottles, and ancient newspaper to the front of the house. The gray-mustached detective, who had sat beside me in the car, carried a red axe. We stepped up onto the porch. Noise and fire came out under a windowsill. The gray-mustached detective fell down, hiding the axe under his corpse. The rest of us ran away. I ran with Noonan. We hid in the ditch on the inside of the road. It was deep enough and banked high enough to let us stand almost erect without being targets. The chief was excited. "What luck," he said happily. "He's here, by God, he's here." "That shot came from under the sill," I said. "Not a bad trick." "We'll spoil it, though," he said cheerfully. "We'll sieve the dump. Duffy ought to be pulling up on the other road by now, and Terry Shane won't be many minutes behind him. Hey, Donner," he called to a man who was peeping around a boulder. "Swing around back and tell Duffy and Shane to start closing in as soon as they come. Let fly with all they got. Where's Kimball?" The peeper jerked his thumb toward the tree beyond him. We could see only the upper part of it from our ditch. "Tell him to set up his mill and start grinding," Noonan ordered. "Low, across the front. Ought to do it like cutting cheese." And the peeper disappeared. Noonan went up and down the ditch, risking his noodle over the top now and then for a look around, once in a while calling or gesturing to his men. He came back, sat on his heels beside me, gave me a cigar, and lit one for himself. "It'll do," he said complacently. "Whisper won't have a chance. He's done." The machine gun by the tree fired, haltingly, experimentally, 8 or 10 shots. Noonan grinned and let a smoke ring float out of his mouth. The machine gun settled down to business, grinding out metal like the busy little death factory it was. Noonan blew another smoke ring and said, "That's exactly what it'll do." I agreed that it ought to. We leaned against the clay bank and smoked a while. Further away, another machine gun got going, and then a third. Irregularly, rifles, pistols, shotguns joined in. Noonan nodded approvingly and said, 5 minutes of that will let 'em know there's a hell." When the 5 minutes were up, I suggested a look at the remains. I gave him a boost up the bank and scrambled up after him. The roadhouse was as bleak and empty-looking as before, but more battered. No shots came from it. Plenty were going into it. "What do you think?" Noonan asked. "If there's a cellar, there might be a mouse alive in it." "Well, we can finish him afterwards." He took a whistle out of his pocket and made a lot of noise. He waved his fat arms, and the gunfire began dwindling. We had to wait for the word to go all the way around. Then we crashed the door. The first floor was ankle-deep with booze that was still gurgling from bullet holes in the stacked-up cases and barrels that filled most of the house. Dizzy with the fumes of spilled hooch, we waited around until we found 4 dead bodies and no live ones. The 4 were swarthy, foreign-looking men in laborers' clothes. 2 of them were practically shot to pieces, and Noonan said, "Leave them here and get out." His voice was cheerful, but in the flashlight's glow, his eyes showed white ringed with fear. We went out gladly, though. I did hesitate long enough to pocket an unbroken bottle labeled Dwar. A khaki-dressed copper was tumbling off a motorcycle at the gate, and he yelled at us, "The First National's been stuck up!" Noonan cursed savagely and bawled, "He's foxed us, damn him! Back to town, everybody!" Everybody except us, who had ridden with the chief, beat it for the machines. 2 of them took the dead detective with them. Noonan looked at me out of his eyes corners and said, "This is a tough one. No fooling." I said, "Well," shrugged, sauntered over to his car, where the driver was sitting at the wheel. I stood with my back to the house, talking to Pat. I don't remember what we talked about. Presently, Noonan and the other sleuths joined us. Only a little flame showed through the open roadhouse door before we passed out of sight around the bend in the road. Thank you for listening.